This is not the Fleetwood Mac you know. There is no Stevie Nicks in this story. There is no Lindsey Buckingham. There is no Dreams, no The Chain, no Rumours. That Fleetwood Mac, the one that sold 100 million records and became one of the biggest bands in history, did not exist yet. This is the story of the first Fleetwood Mac, a British blues band founded in London in 1967 by a guitarist named Peter Green. And this is the story of why he gave it away. Peter Green was, by the time he was 21, considered the finest blues guitarist in Britain. That is not an exaggeration. When Eric Clapton left John Mayall's Bluesbreakers in 1966, Peter Green was the man Mayall chose to replace him. Not because Peter sounded like Clapton, because Peter sounded better. B.B. King heard him play and said, "He has the sweetest tone I have ever heard." Peter Green was 23 when King said that. Clapton was already famous. Green was not. The difference would define both their careers. In 1967, Peter left Mayall's band and started his own group. He named it Fleetwood Mac, after the rhythm section he took with him, Mick Fleetwood on drums and John McVie on bass. He did not name the band after himself. That is the first clue to what would happen later. The man who built the house did not put his name on the door. What follows is a 3-year story. From 1967 to 1970, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac released 4 albums, had a #1 single in England with the instrumental Albatross, wrote Black Magic Woman, which Santana would later make famous, and became the biggest blues band in Britain. And then Peter Green walked away from all of it. He did not sell his share. He did not negotiate an exit. He gave it away. The guitars, the money, the publishing rights, the band name. He gave it all away. And then he disappeared. This is the Fleetwood Mac Files, Volume 1. Before Stevie, before Lindsey, before Rumours, before any of it. There was Peter Green, a Les Paul and the sweetest tone B.B. King had ever heard. And this is what happened to it. Peter Green was born Peter Allen Greenbaum in Bethnal Green, London, in 1946. His family was Jewish. His father was a postman. There was no music industry connection, no wealthy patron, no lucky break waiting in the family tree. Peter taught himself guitar as a teenager by listening to B.B. King and Freddie King records on a second-hand turntable in his bedroom. He practiced until his fingers bled. Then he practiced more. The thing that made Peter Green different from every other blues guitarist in Britain was his tone. Not his speed, he was fast, but so were others. Not his technique, he was precise, but so was Clapton. It was the tone. A warm, singing, sustaining sound that seemed to come from somewhere inside the guitar rather than from the amplifier. Other guitarists tried to copy it. They could not. Part of the secret was the guitar itself. A 1959 Gibson Les Paul, whose neck pickup had been installed backwards, creating a thin, out-of-phase sound that was unique in the world. Part of the secret was Peter's hands, and part of the secret was something nobody could explain. He joined John Mayall's Bluesbreakers in 1966, replacing Eric Clapton. The Bluesbreakers were the finishing school of British blues. Clapton had made his name there, and now Peter Green was expected to fill those shoes. He did not fill them, he outgrew them. Within months, Mayall's audiences were coming specifically for Peter. The word in the London blues clubs was simple. The new kid is better than Clapton. By 1967, Peter was ready. He left Mayall and took Mick Fleetwood with him. John McVie joined shortly after, reluctantly because Mayall paid better. They added a second guitarist, Jeremy Spencer, whose specialty was Elmore James-style slide guitar. Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac played its first gig at the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival on August 12, 1967. They were 4 young men playing American blues with British accents and a conviction that was impossible to fake. The first album, Fleetwood Mac, came out in February 1968. It went to number 4 in the UK, a blues album, number 4, in the same year that the Beatles released the White Album and the Rolling Stones released Beggar's Banquet. Peter Green's blues was selling alongside the biggest bands on earth. In 1968, Peter Green wrote an instrumental called Albatross. It was not a blues song, it was something else entirely, a slow, drifting, ocean-like guitar piece, with 2 melodic lines weaving around each other, one played by Peter and one by the new third guitarist Danny Kirwan. It sounded like nothing else in British rock. It sounded like the sea at night. It went to number 1 in the United Kingdom, a guitar instrumental with no vocals by a blues band, number 1. That does not happen. Peter Green made it happen. The same year he wrote Black Magic Woman, a minor key blues with a descending riff that coils around itself like smoke. Peter Green's original version was released as a single in 1968. It did moderately well. 2 years later, Carlos Santana recorded a Latin rock version that became a global hit and one of the most recognizable songs of the 1970s. The world knows Black Magic Woman as a Santana song. It is not. It is a Peter Green song. The man who wrote it was already gone by the time Santana made it famous. And then there was Oh Well. Released in 1969, it is the song that proved Peter Green could do anything. The first half is a ferocious, distorted electric blues riff, one of the heaviest things recorded in 1969, predicting heavy metal by a full decade. The second half is a gentle, Spanish-influenced acoustic piece with cellos. The two halves do not belong together. That is the point. Peter Green put them together because he could, because he wanted to prove that a blues guitarist did not have to stay in one room. By late 1969, Fleetwood Mac were the biggest blues band in Europe. They had had a number 1 single. They had written what would become one of the most covered songs in rock history. They were selling out every venue in Britain. Peter Green was 23 years old. He was at the absolute peak of his creative power. And then, on a European tour in the spring of 1970, the band stopped in Munich. And something happened in Munich that would end Peter Green's career, destroy the original Fleetwood Mac, and create one of the strangest disappearances in the history of rock and roll. The details of what happened in Munich are disputed. What is known is this. During a stop on a European tour in early 1970, Peter Green was taken to a party at a commune outside the city. He was given LSD. The experience was, by all accounts, devastating. People who saw Peter before Munich and after Munich described 2 different people. Before Munich, he was focused, driven, quietly funny, professionally ambitious. After Munich, he was distracted, anxious, increasingly detached from the idea of being a rock star, or of being anything at all. He began telling the other members of Fleetwood Mac that they should give all their money away. He said wealth was immoral. He said the band should donate its earnings to charity. Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, who had mortgages and families, said no. Peter insisted. The arguments became the center of the band's life. The music, which had been the point, became secondary to a philosophical crisis that nobody else in the band shared. Peter Green played his last concert with Fleetwood Mac on May 20th, 1970. There was no dramatic farewell. He simply told the band he was leaving. He did not sell his share of the band. He did not negotiate a buyout. He did not retain publishing rights to the songs he had written. He gave it all away. The name Fleetwood Mac, which he had created, continued without him. He did not ask for it back. He gave away his guitars. He grew his fingernails so long that he could no longer play. He grew a beard and a long, unkempt hair. He was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia and spent years in psychiatric hospitals. He received electroconvulsive therapy. He lived on welfare. He worked as a hospital porter, a gravedigger, and a petrol station attendant. The man who had been called the greatest blues guitarist in Britain was stacking shelves and pumping petrol and washing dishes, and nobody in those workplaces knew who he was. Meanwhile, the band he had built and given away went on to become one of the biggest-selling musical acts in the history of recorded music. Fleetwood Mac, without Peter Green, would sell over 100 million records. Peter Green's share of that fortune was zero. He had given it away, all of it, on purpose. Peter Green built Fleetwood Mac. He named it. He recruited the members. He wrote the songs. He gave it the sound, that warm, singing, sustaining tone that B.B. King called the sweetest he had ever heard. And then he gave it all away and disappeared into a life that had no music in it. The band kept his rhythm section, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, and those two names, Fleetwood and Mac, became the foundation of something Peter Green never imagined. A Californian pop-rock empire that would produce Rumours, one of the best-selling albums of all time. Everything that came after, Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham, Dreams, Go Your Own Way, The Chain, was built on top of the structure Peter Green created and abandoned. He came back, eventually. In the late 1990s, medicated and stable, he began playing again. Small gigs, low-key tours, with the Peter Green Splinter Group. The tone was still there. Quieter, more fragile, but unmistakably his. He was never angry about what had happened to the band. He was never bitter about the money. When asked about Fleetwood Mac's later success, he said simply, "Good for them." Peter Green died on July 25th, 2020, at the age of 73, peacefully, in his sleep. The man who built the house died in a different house, having given the first one away decades earlier. He was never forgotten by the musicians who understood what he had done. But he was forgotten by the world that danced to Dreams without knowing where the name came from. This is the Fleetwood Mac Files, Volume 1. The man who built it and gave it away. Next, what happened to the band he left behind? And the people who tried to fill the space he created. Subscribe. We do this every day.